That's pretty close. That's pretty close. That's Titanic before and after right there. Seeing the scale of this destruction up close is really, really amazing. Cool. I didn't know those were still there. It's kind of nice that that area is still relatively intact. So it should be somewhere here. Is that it? Is that it right there? Ladies and gentlemen, it's your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs, and today I'm a very happy ship nerd indeed. Now, you might recall Magellan as being the team behind the scans of the Titanic that were done a couple of years ago now. They did a process called photogrammetry. Now, I explained this in the video that I did when the scans were new, but essentially they mapped Titanic's wreck as it is on the sea floor, as it was in 2022 when they did it. There's been a few very, very, very small changes since then. But the reason this was exciting is because it's never really been captured this way before. We have had paintings, we've had photo mosaics, but we've never had an accurate 3D model of the ship as it is today. And Magellan have come out and said that no other 3D modeling was done, that this is purely the scans. This is exactly what Titanic looks like. And for a little while there, I was wondering, how are they going to display this? How are they going to make it public so that we can explore the ship? And they've come out with a video game. And exploring the ship is something they've taken very literally, because in the video game, you pilot an ROV, a remotely operated vehicle, just like the real thing, the ones that they send down to explore Titanic. Now, Magellan used a pair of them called Romeo and Juliet. And James Cameron had a pair of his that were called Jake and Elwood. So obviously picking wry little names as a real ROV operators thing. But essentially in the game, you pilot an ROV and explore the Titanic. So I thought I'd get my excited little hands on it and show you around. Maybe we can see some interesting things, see what's going on down there on the wreck of the Titanic. So without further ado, let's jump in. Okay, so Magellan has given us an ROV to fly around and explore the Titanic. It's worth noting that this is technically an early access. So this is kind of the shape of things to come, and they plan on introducing a whole bunch of new features. They've just shown off a roadmap for the next year and a bit. What's really exciting about this is that this is only 10% of the resolution of the scans of Titanic. Just bumped into the seafloor. Being an ROV pilot and presenting a video at the same time is quite difficult. So because they've lent into the more realistic side of things, you spawn in your ROV away from the Titanic and you have to go and find it. So we're going to switch to first person view now. And you'll notice we only have 19 minutes of operations time. And there's the Titanic. So this is the bow section of the ship. And so this is probably the most photographed view of Titanic, but it is pretty spectacular. I will never, ever get tired of this view. So as I mentioned, this is not a modeled version of Titanic's bow. These are scans of essentially exactly what it looks like on the seafloor today. So there are different levels of realism for the game, but what I'm going to do is bump it all the way up, all the way down to low realism, because first of all, it makes things a lot brighter so we can see more, but it also gives us more time on the operational limit so I can talk about what we're looking at. So as I mentioned, this is only 10% of the final resolutions of the scans, and so it's just really interesting to get a sense of what's going on down here. Now, one of the big changes to the wreck has been the loss of this bit of railing here. This piece of railing was actually a portable railing. It was designed to be removed so that the big anchor crane here, which is facing the wrong way, could pluck the Titanic's central giant anchor right there and lower it essentially over the side of the ship. Now, what caused that to collapse is the subject of some conjecture, but I'm of the opinion that it was possibly bumped into, which is interesting. There's been a lot of activity down at the Titanic wreck site, a couple of expeditions filming this part of the wreck. It's likely they might have hit something. Straight away, we can see here the a few recognizable pieces of the wreck that have been seen quite a bit. Right here, you have the forestay shackle. Right on the stem post here, there is a piece of equipment that was essentially designed to assist in holding up the mast. So you can see that it's swung down here with maybe what looks like maybe a little bit of rust hanging off the end of it. The rusticles which grow on the side of Titanic being the results of bacteria which are actually eating the steel of the ship. But you can see the shackle with its retaining pin in the middle of it here. I can't lower the brightness of that light, I don't think, but you can just see the retaining pin in the center and then the shackle hanging off it. And that would have held two very large 3-inch thick steel wire stays that held up the foremast, and they would have run all the way up there. But of course now the mast is not up there. What's really interesting about this is you really get a sense for the scale of Titanic, which I think photographs really don't do it justice. If we get down here without hitting the sea floor, you can see I'm already down to 22% integrity before my submarine is destroyed. You really get a sense for how big this thing is and how little you can see at any one time. You can also see how deep she's buried in the mud. This is her starboard anchor, and she is buried pretty deep. It's remarkable how much of the bow is either crumpled or disappeared beneath the mud. Let's swing along the starboard side here, because this is roughly where Titanic's strike with the iceberg occurred, all the way along here. And unfortunately, as you can see, it's all buried. Which doesn't really tell us much about what happened the night Titanic struck the berg. Titanic's nameplate should be somewhere around here. Some people have said they can spot the letters of the ship's name, but I'm not sure that I can. Does that look like a T to you? The outline of a T? Potentially. They were etched in so that painters knew where they would paint the gold for the nameplate. But they were very, very, very finely and thinly etched in. The letters were quite a few inches tall, but the actual lettering itself was very, very thin etching, and so it's kind of difficult to spot the nameplate. The letters weren't bolted on to the side or anything like that. Sweeping around here, we get a really good idea of the kind of damage that was done to Titanic when it hit the sea floor. It's amazing seeing this. This is a remarkable view, actually, because if we just come along here, we should get a good view of roughly where Father Francis Brown was in his tender, in the tender boat, when he took a photograph looking up at Titanic's hull. And looking out over here, down at him, was Captain Smith. That's pretty close. That's pretty close. That's Titanic before and after right there. Oof. Pretty unrecognizable. Now, this bit of damage was done when Titanic struck the seafloor. As I mentioned, you can actually make out the decks inside as they continue down through the ship. So the shell plating is essentially bulged outwards, because when Titanic hit the seafloor at the speed that she was doing, around 21, 22 knots, it blew this shell plating right out and essentially broke Titanic's back. But everything behind it is fairly well intact. And James Cameron and some of the others have described coming across the side of Titanic. It's like appearing before a giant steel cliff face. And you really get a sense of this because it rises up out of the mud and it is enormous and extremely tall. And it looks just like a cliff. So that shell plating, buckling, that damage, that's all a result of the impact of the sea floor. But the damage that we're going to look at back here is a result of the Titanic's breakup. Fortunately, a good section of the bow is in pretty good nick. So we can kind of come along here. There's some things down here on the sea floor it'd be interesting to get a better look at. Unfortunately, because this is only 10% of the resolution of the final scans, some of this debris is a little bit difficult to make out. But there's all kinds of stuff littering the sides of the ship. Some of it's fallen off with time, and some of it actually fell off when Titanic struck the ocean floor itself. The most interesting thing about these scans is it shows us the kind of damage that has happened to Titanic with the ravages of time. But there are certain things that are still extremely noticeable and iconic. For example, these twin boarding doors. So these were the doors that led into the D-deck entryway. There was a little vestibule on the side there, and then passengers in first class could board through here, and they would be in the reception room. There was a central hub. The first class main staircase was there, and they could go find their staterooms and their suites. There's actually a fairly famous photograph of Titanic taken from roughly down here. Let me see if I can try and recreate this photo as well for you. And it looks like the photo was taken from somewhere about here. Roughly there. I guess what's interesting about this picture and the comparison is you can see just how much of the ship is missing from the breakup. So you'll notice just forward of the doors in that photograph there was a little mooring fairlead, a little hole, and it looks like that could be it there. I think that's possibly the bottom of it. It looks a little bit too close. It should be somewhere along here. And that was essentially like a little hole where you could put one of the lines to connect a tender boat to the ship and make sure it wouldn't move away. One of the interesting things along here is checking out which stateroom windows are swung open, which ones aren't. Some of these were actually opened on the night of the sinking because first class staterooms, some of them were surprisingly hot. The heating system had a few quirks, and some passengers opened their stateroom windows. You can see this one here is on a pivoting axis. It's called an Utley pivoting porthole. It's actually pivoted to the side. We've been letting fresh air in, provided it was actually opened on the night. Because a lot of these others are actually shut and they're secured in place. These were very heavily reinforced with dogs, which are essentially screws that hold the porthole in place. They're fairly heavy-duty brass fittings. And in theory, when Titanic hit the sea floor, maybe the pressure was enough to shear some of those off and pop the portholes open. But the theory goes that a lot of these open portholes were probably open on the night of the sinking. Very interesting. So there's a few things down here that are recognizable and iconic and in good nick. And there's a lot of things that aren't. And unfortunately, it looks like this here is where things are starting to go bad. So we can already see up here on A deck, on the promenade, that the ship is being eaten away, the superstructure is being eaten away, because it's relatively thin. Now, we've talked about this on the channel before, but the superstructure sits on top of the hull. The hull is a rigid body. It's extremely heavy duty, very reinforced, made of a fairly thick steel comparatively. But the superstructure, A deck and the boat deck above it, and these deck houses, they're fairly thin because they don't have to bear the same kinds of loads or strain as the hull does. Now, one of the things that they had to do to the superstructure to make sure that it wouldn't buckle or rip as Titanic was going along through big seas was to install an expansion joint. And you can see here that the expansion joint, which would usually be, fairly compact, has essentially split open in a big V break that runs all the way down to B deck here. Now, this is where the expansion joint itself did terminate, but you can see that it's opened all the way up. This would have been covered with some leather and some little brass plates so that people couldn't get their feet stuck in it when they were walking along, but it would have been very, very small, and it's been opened up quite significantly by the impact with the sea floor. But we can already start to see some pretty significant deterioration along A deck here. You can see that these screens, which granted are very, very thin, and they were added quite last minute for Titanic. Olympic didn't have these. They were open all the way through. But Titanic had these little screens with windows added. The window frame you can see here is just popping through. But the screen itself around it is being eaten away all the way along. And in fact, just after the expansion joint here, just behind it, that's all been eaten away. And this is not looking good. This is not looking good. This is the entrance for the grand staircase. So this is the first class entrance for Titanic, the start of their private promenade on the boat deck for the first class passengers. Everything forward of that is officers only. These are officers' quarters. We'll come back to those in a minute. So this is where the grand staircase started and ran down into the bottom of the ship. But this entire area has deteriorated and collapsed. And this angle alone is kind of difficult to work out what you're looking at. So let me help you. You've got here the outline of what very, very little remains of a fairly thin vent cover. So these were the vents that ran all the way down into the boiler rooms. They basically followed the funnel uptakes right down into the bowels of the ship. And these stokehold vents had that exact profile where they kind of sat up straight and then curved down at the back. But this one has almost entirely collapsed. This one sat in front of the second funnel. and the vent itself has almost collapsed, except for the port side of the vent cover itself, which is right there. You can see the big gaping hole that's left behind, which goes all the way down into the stokehold. Behind that, you can see the fiddly grates. Now, these fiddly grates were essentially a little cover that sat on top of another big vacant hole that went all the way down into the boiler rooms. They followed the Titanic's funnel uptakes as well. These were actually a kind of like emergency escape hatch that firemen could essentially get up on ladders and go all the way up and open these grates and get out of the boiler rooms that way. Ostensibly, these are actually used to allow hot air to escape. Naturally, hot air rises, and so they're just part of the ventilation system to get that hot and stale air out. Behind it, you can see the base of the second funnel. So Titanic's second funnel was taken off during the sinking. You can maybe just make out the lip of the exterior of the funnel here. These were riveted to the deck beams and the plates around them. There would have been a cover on this, obviously, but it's all basically corroded off. As a law, generally, as a rule, anywhere there is damage from a sinking on a shipwreck like this, that's where you're going to get the most corrosion, the most rotting through time, the most rusting away. And that's pretty evident here. There's no surprise that Titanic's being eaten away from the breakup zone where the funnels collapsed forward of that. So the interior here, this inner oval cylinder looking thing, is the top of the lower funnel. So this is what then goes down into the decks of the ship and then connects to the uptakes to allow all of the smoke and the gases to funnel up out of the top of the smokestack. So it's giving us a pretty neat cross-section of the funnel. And you can see how much of this is actually just vacant space, but also you can see the baffles. So these plates inside the lower funnel, which help to direct gases. It's essentially functioned like the flue of a chimney, and it provided those big funnels, provided optimal burn for the furnaces all the way down in the bottom of the ship. And the baffles helped not only maintain rigidity of this structure, but to also separate the individual lines of evacuation for those gases, and it helped the furnaces in that way. But the deckhouse that it sits on is pretty far gone, and it has collapsed down. So that deckhouse roof should be at the same level as that. But as you can see, everything here just behind that expansion joint has collapsed. And honestly, I'm kind of shocked at how bad this is. This is a lot more damaged and destroyed than even I thought it was. Yikes. This is the gymnasium, what remains of the gymnasium. So this bit here, it's handy having this little laser pointer so I can show you guys what I'm talking about. Thanks for that, Magellan, that's handy. This is the gymnasium. The roof's come down on it. You can actually just see there's a tiny little bit of roof still sticking up over here on the left at the back of the deckhouse where it ends, with the margin planking, the teak margin planking at the end of it. But everything else is collapsed. You can just make out where they would have had the beams holding this compartment up, and then between those beams they would have had windows. And actually, if we sit about here, there is a photograph of the author Jacques Futrelle standing just here. It was taken by Father Francis Brown. And this gives you an idea of what the space would have looked like before. But sadly, this has really, really collapsed terribly. In the distance, you can just make out a little electric winch that was used to pull up the Titanic's boats. In the event they'd been launched, they could be brought back up, but they weren't used during the evacuation. This is pretty dramatic because this has collapsed down, by the looks of it, to B deck. Is that right? It's actually, I don't want to bash into the Titanic because first of all, that seems like bad luck. And second of all, I don't want to destroy the ROV. Yes, so this has collapsed down 2 decks. Ooh, we've got a nice big tear right here where this big section of shell plating just drops off. Wow. Seeing the scale of this destruction up close is really, really amazing. I mean, gee, she's in bad shape. This is bad. Yeah, we had known for a long time that the gymnasium roof had collapsed, but I guess I wasn't fully aware that the collapse was this bad. And if we actually go in and have a look here, the entryway into the gymnasium, you can see actually it looks like that's been eaten away as well. And we're just looking straight at B deck. Wow, there is really not much here that's recognizable. For a while there, you could just make out some of the bases of the equipment from the gymnasium. But now I can't see anything. Yikes. It's difficult to make out. Gee, yeah, not good. So the gymnasium is virtually unrecognizable. In fact, there's now a hole in the floor there looking straight down into 2 decks below where it shouldn't be. Unfortunately now as well, it looks like because the boat deck here has collapsed back, we won't be able to get into the promenade deck on A deck here and take a look, because we can't squeeze through there, and they wouldn't be able to squeeze through in real life either, by the looks of it. And at the other end, there is a screen with a door set up, which is closed, which means we won't be able to recreate some of those really famous photographs of the promenade. Wow, this is bad. Recognizable here are a couple of the blocks that we use for lowering the boats. They would actually wrap the lines around these, kind of like a T-cross looking lump of steel, and they would wrap the lines around, and actually from that they're able to let go the ropes and lower the boats. Titanic's decks were made of different types of timber. A lot of it was yellow pine, and it's all been eaten away because yellow pine not so hardy. Although when submerged, that's pretty thick. I mean, the beams were like that thick, the planks. What has survived, I mentioned just earlier, is the teak margin planking. So teak surrounded the edges. Teak is extremely hardy. On the battleship Bismarck, there's a lot of teak decking still in place. But you can actually make out, if we get closer to the deck here, you make all these little dots along the deck, these little bulbs like this. Those are actually the bolts that would have once held the planks to the deck, the steel deck plates themselves, and they're still intact, which is kind of cool. But it gives you a sense of where the planks would have been, but there doesn't seem to be much deck planking left. Although, I will say, it's kind of hard to make out, but it looks like... I wonder if there's any planking left here. That could be some planking there, you know? Typically, if there's a big lump of metal sitting on top of something, it can be well preserved. Sometimes planking survives. We'll keep an eye out for any planking that still exists. See, up here, on the roof of the officers' quarters, that looks like planking that's survived to me, because you don't see the rivet heads or the bolts that would have held them down. That could be planking that survived. Anyway. So just behind the expansion joint, we've got the skylight for the Marconi wireless room. So just behind that, they had a big ventilator head that led directly below it into the elevator machinery room. And just forward was the Marconi wireless room. Now, this is where they wanted to cut into the wreck and pull the Marconi wireless out of it. You can see that the roof is pretty heavily corroded. I brought this up last time we looked at these scans, and some of you mentioned that it was largely because of ROVs and the mere submersibles and submersibles like that landing on the roof of the officers' quarters, because you can see it's kind of like a very conveniently located helipad, really, right in the center of where you'd want to send your ROVs down into the grand staircase. So that's not good. That will probably come down, and there's probably already a lot of sediment lining the floors of the officers' quarters because of it. If we just go back here, we should see, yeah, there they are. The tubes that would have run up, the pneumatic tubes that could have sent messages straight into the Marconi wireless room from the purser's office, just behind it down on C deck. Now, this is just an external model, but we can go down a little bit into the grand staircase and have a look. Let's go down. Let's see if we can see anything interesting. I doubt there'll be really much to look at because Magellan just went around the exterior of the ship photographing and mapping. They didn't go, to my knowledge, inside, but we can see a bit of the boat deck entrance, an A deck below it. This is interesting. You know what? I think, oh yeah, these are chandeliers. That's got to be a chandelier. So, yeah, these have got to be the beaded chandeliers. Years ago, when they were photographing Titanic's wreck, when Cameron went down and Ballard, they found these glass or crystal beaded chandeliers hanging from the roof by their electrical cables. And that was like 20, 30, 40 years ago. And I thought they would have come down, but it looks like there's quite a few of them still hanging. That's wild. That's got to be one there. That's one there. Cool. I didn't know those were still there. Wow. Still hanging up for their lives. This is a big tangled pile of metal. One of the big questions of the Titanic wreck is, what happened to the grand staircase? And honestly, I don't really know. There was the whole theory that it came apart and broke out of the skylight cover above it, but that kind of doesn't hold water because it wasn't just timber. It was held in place with some pretty heavy-duty steel scaffolding. Wow, this has come down. So this is the port side of the entrance, and that's collapsed as well. And we'll go over to the port side now, which is unique because it still has one of the davits resting here. These were shipped in by a Swedish manufacturer, and they were called the Welland Quadrant davit. They were designed to swing back in and pick up the boats behind. But Titanic, in the event, only had one row of boats, so they were largely superfluous. But they were still a pretty cool bit of kit. Ooh, this is bad as well. So, A deck, you can see, has been reduced essentially to its beams on the exterior here. All of those screens are gone. The boat deck's collapsed down onto A deck, and it looks like A deck is beginning to go down onto B deck as well. That Welland Quadrant davit is looking a little bent. The reason they aren't all standing up, there's one swung out there, that we'll come back to that and talk about that in a minute, but there should be a pair there, a pair here, a pair here. But in theory, Titanic's funnels, when she was sinking, may have still been attached by their shrouds and their stay cables and ripped up and down the deck, taking everything with them. And you know what? That could be one of them resting there. Anytime you see these big, thick steel cables that are still lying around, steel cables were used for standing rigging. Standing rigging is like your not the ropes that would be used for lowering lifeboats, for example, or raising cargo or things like that. Standing rigging is like big, thick wires that were used to secure things to the ship. So stays, which were used to secure Titanic's masts to the ship. But every now and then you see something like this one here with the loop on the edge there that looks like it could have come from the top of a funnel, and another one in front of it. Very interesting. Yeah, that loop at the top, those were the kind that were found on the tops of Titanic's funnels. So I wonder if these are actually some of the stay cables that came off the funnels as they sank. But in essence, those cables, which were fairly thick, very heavy duty, ripped up and down the deck, tearing things off as they went. Titanic plunged, you can see our depth there over on the left, about 3,800 meters. And all the while, there was a lot of damage being done. And the theory goes that one of the things that did a lot of damage to the forward end of the ship was its mast. So if we come over here, we can see the davit, which is still swung out, still frozen in place from where it lowered the first portside boats all the way down there. The davits, when they were not in service, were usually kept upright. This set of davits are different though, because it was actually kept swung out when at sea, because Titanic had some emergency boats called cutters that were a little bit smaller than most of its lifeboats. If we come back here, we can recreate a famous photograph of the Titanic. It's just behind the first class entrance. It's just here. Fortunately, this part of the ship is still intact, so we can recreate this photograph. Wait, it'll be worth it, trust me. There you go, before and after. So you can see on this photograph of Titanic at Queenstown in Ireland Cove that the forwardmost set of davits are actually swung out to allow the cutter, the emergency boat, to sit there poised in case of a man overboard or some kind of situation where they'd need to quickly deploy a lifeboat. And that forward davit right there in that photograph is the one that's still standing on the wreck, the one we're looking at right there. Absolutely remarkable. You can see all the other davits in front of it have been ripped off. The other thing you can see in this photo is the electric winch still in place. And of course, the first class entrance, which is completely collapsed. Absolutely remarkable. So yeah, it's interesting that there are some things still in place exactly where they were left the night of the sinking. There are other things that have just been ripped, torn apart. Titanic's been through a lot the last 110 years, but the sinking exacted a terrible toll upon the ship. Seeing this up close is pretty remarkable. It's eerie. It's spooky because, you know, this isn't a recreation of the wreck. This is it. This is what it looks like. Unreal. So now we're in the vicinity of the bridge. We can see a davit sitting here that absolutely shouldn't be sitting there. You can see the wall here, the bulkhead of the officers' quarters here has been blown out and slapped down onto its side. So a lot of damage has occurred here, and actually a big chunk of the bridge is missing. I'll explain in a minute. We can do another before and after photograph here. If we go on top of the roof of the officers' quarters here and stand right here. There's another before and after for you. So that gives you a sense of how much of Titanic's bridge has been demolished. And there's a clue in this photograph as to what might have done that. And it's the big lump of steel sitting in front of the bridge right there, the mast. Titanic's mast was held in place with those thick stay cables that we were talking about earlier, but they had to have failed at a certain point, and they gave way as Titanic was planing down towards the sea floor, and the mast came down. And as it did, it probably smashed into the bridge behind it. Now, you can actually just get a sense of how much of the bridge is actually gone, because it used to come out, the bridge wings were out here, and it came out to about here, level with a deck below it. So you can actually just see one of the deck beams sticking out, which is where the edge of the bridge once was. You can see all of this bridge is gone, which means the ship's, the wheel that would have been used when the pilot was aboard, the telegraphs, they're all gone. What still remains that is just recognizable is the wheelhouse. Now, this is a section of the ship that was mainly made out of timber to help with the compasses, the more sensitive navigational equipment. So the bulkhead for the wheelhouse has been eaten away, but this would have been fully enclosed. And you can actually just see the steel coaming. The coaming is what they riveted to the deck plates as a guide to then erect the wood planking for this room. And you can just make out where that would have been. There would have been a door here. There would have been a door here. And this is the ship's main telemotor, which would have held the main wheel for the ship. And so Quartermaster Hitchens was standing right here the night the Titanic struck the iceberg. It's a pretty significant part of the wreck. It's a pretty famous part of the wreck. It's been talked about a lot, and it's here that all these expedition plaques have been left from all the previous expeditions to Titanic. You can see they're all gathered here. They have little rope lanyards because they would have been brought down by ROVs and left in place as a little mark of respect. But it's interesting, all these lines, this tangle of steel rope and lines and things gives us a bit of a clue that there was a lot of activity here as Titanic was being busted apart, the bridge, by the mast. Speaking of which, we can see that the mast is also in a bad way, and it is draped now across the well deck down here. It was once sitting intact across the well deck, but over time, gravity's done its thing. It's slowly folded in and collapsed on top. The top I don't exactly know how much it is, but the top section of Titanic's mast was actually made out of wood and timber. So that's gone. But what remains is the steel part, which you can see down here. We are going to recreate another Titanic photo now. There was one very famous one taken just over here. I'm going to see if I can get down there to take a picture of it. It might be a little bit difficult with all this debris sitting around. This is interesting. What are you? You know, that is that's the bulkhead for the bridge. That's actually the forward bulkhead for the bridge. And yeah, that's interesting. That's the front of one of the wings by the looks of it. One of the bridge wings. You can see the big window cut out there. The bridge wing sat either port or starboard. It's where the ship's captain could look down the length to make sure that all was well. But it looks like that's actually one of the bridge wing cabs right there. Yep, where it cuts in there. And then this is the bulkhead. Actually, if I bring up that photograph again, it's this bulkhead here, but on the other side. You can actually see these little stanchions which once held it upright. So that is the edge of the boat deck. And this is where the front of the bridge would have begun, just here. But that's all gone. The deck beneath it is gone as well. So let's try and recreate this Titanic photo. I told you we wouldn't be able to get into the A-deck promenade, and this is why. Because there was a screen here, there is a door and a window, but there's also a pile of bridge debris blocking us. So this is another fairly famous Titanic photograph, and it was taken from about here. Before and after. Yikes. So you can see just how much of this has collapsed. And this wall, this bulkhead, is the one on the left. You actually see those windows there. These were for some of the A-deck staterooms. You can actually see one of the windows right there. They were two parts. They had a bottom part, a little top part on top. You can actually see the little top part there. A little bottom part there. Unbelievable. I wonder if there's anything remaining of the bottom of the telemotor there for this part of the bridge. It doesn't look like it. Maybe. Yeah, we're doing some Titanic investigation work right now. Whoop, that was a little bit too close. It's interesting that there's one of these stanchions still standing. There were 3 big stanchions at the forward end of the A-deck promenade here, holding up the bridge above, and there's one still upright. The rest have all come down. That could be one there, maybe? These are those windows I was telling you about. It's spooky, actually. The resolution of these scans is so good. Bearing in mind, this is only 10% of the final resolution. You can see which windows are open, which ones are closed, and which ones are broken. And these ones are broken. These would have been some very, very fine first-class staterooms because you would have had this view straight over the bow of the ship. Here is what remains of the top of the mast. It's come down here on A-deck, and this is probably what brought down this bulwark here that looked out over the bow of the ship. So you can see, as Titanic's kind of planing away, this mast is what's smashing all this up. Not looking too good. Let's have a little look down here. This is a small gate that was installed to prevent third-class passengers who had a little promenade down here in the well deck from getting up into what was meant to be a first-class area. Now, on the night of the sinking, these were, in theory, locked. Now, this is partly what gave rise to the great myth of third class being locked below by gates, because this is a gate, it was meant to keep third class people below, and it was locked. That said, it is only about waist high, so more of a deterrent, not so much a... My submarine died because I ran out of time. More of a deterrent, less of an actual physical barricade, as it were. I'm going to... I think I'd make a lousy ROV pilot. I'm going to restart and go back to where we left off. So we're coming back to the bow of Titanic. We've recharged our submarine. We just got a new one. Good thing ROVs are so cheap, right? There's a number of interesting things along here. This is part of the ship that's probably the most well preserved. And you can even make out, if you look down here on the capstan, these are rotating pieces of equipment that were designed to pick up one of the lines and wrap it around when the ship was warping or going against a dock. Essentially the crew would rig lines up, obviously, to keep it in place, and they could tie those lines off on big bollards here, lead them through the fair leads, These little fair leads here, they had little divots in the side of them, so you could run a rope through that. This is all removable railing, so you could take this bit of railing off, put the rope around through the fair lead, and tie it off here. Or if you wanted to take it in a little closer to the dock, you could wrap it around the capstan. The capstan would rotate because it was connected to a steam engine on the deck below, and that would bring Titanic in closer to the dock. You actually just make out the manufacturer's name etched into the top, the brass top of the capstan there, which is very cool. We can't read it though on this model because this is only 10% of their scan quality, their scan resolution. Titanic had a little secret function though, which is that some of these bollards had empty interiors. And they're actually secretly also vents. It's a very clever little system. You can see that some of these have open tops. There would have been a top on top of that would have been able to draw air into the compartment below. So this is all your anchor handling equipment, the windlasses, and this is probably the most well kept, most well preserved part of Titanic. That little hole there, you can just see, if I go back here, there's like a little section here, there's like a little hole with a cover. These were sockets for the ship's brass telephones. They had a portable telephone system because when the ship was departing or docking, there would have been a senior officer standing here at the bow and a number of men who were tasked with securing ropes and things like that. You can see from here the bridge is actually quite a ways away, and so they had a telephone system that they could put these big brass telephones in there on a pedestal and speak directly to the bridge. But I have it on good authority from Captain Bissett of the Cunard line that the quality of the voice over the line was not so good. He had a very funny way of describing it. It was like somewhere between a gargle and a roar or something like that. So yeah, you could still actually just make out the mounting point for the telephone would have been right around here. So yeah, a lot of this stuff is in pretty good, condition, given the rest of the ship is looking a little bit sad. I also think it's sometimes a little bit difficult to make out, but it looks like some of this is preserved deckwood. There could be some timber here that hasn't been eaten away. A little bit tricky to make out, but it does look like it. Ooh, especially here on the port side of the number 1 cargo hatch. That looks like, it looks like intact deckwood to me. Parts of it at least, anyway. It is wild seeing this. This little vent here, the vent head, you can see that's being eaten through. Anything with very thin steel like that is being eaten through. The cover for one of the reels, there was like a a reel of steel wire in here. The cover's been being eaten away. We can see some of the big stays for the mast here, just kind of draped over the deck. These are the big, thick steel wires that would have once held the mast up. Just here on the left, you can see a bracket for one of the derricks. So the boom derricks, which would have sat in here, they could have been locked in place, and they could actually assist in loading and unloading cargo into the number 1 cargo hatch here. There was a cargo derrick stored on the reverse of the mast, which I can't quite make out if it's kind of smushed underneath or if it's broken off during the sinking, but there was one kept on the reverse of the mast. But in theory, that could have been placed on the forward aspect here instead. On Olympic, there was actually a bell hanging here, and they changed that on Titanic and put it behind the mast. And whether or not that's still back there, smushed underneath the mast, I'm not entirely sure. But we can see, tons of wires leading everywhere. These are all the tackle, all the standing rigging that would have held the mast up. And actually, you know what? We can recreate another before and after shot. If we just go over here and perch ourselves down just forward of this big breakwater here. In theory, forward of this breakwater was just reserved for crew. But on the day that Titanic was one of the days that she was at Southampton, a news cameraman came aboard and he took a photograph from basically just about, maybe like a little bit further over here. It was about this angle. The frame of view is different, but you can see the big, winch at the base of the mast sitting there. This gives us a view of just how much of Titanic's been smashed apart. All the funnels are gone, of course, and the bridge front no longer exists. The builder's plaque would have once sat just up here. I wonder if we can see where it would have been. Let's go take a look. The big cargo cranes are still in place here. They're pretty impressive looking pieces of equipment. Their covers are still intact. It doesn't look like they're being eaten away much. Let's have a look. No, they look like they're in pretty decent shape, although it looks like there's a few small holes in here. These were mostly hollow, except for the fact that inside there was some of the electric machinery for the cranes themselves. Builder's plaque. Right there. Wow, there you go. So that would have said Highland and Wolf, Shipyard, Belfast, Northern Ireland, and it would have sat right there. A little ovular shape, so you can still see where it would have been. That's a pretty cool thing. I didn't know it was that obvious that that's where the builder's plaque would have once sat. Unreal. You can actually just see here that some of these stateroom windows are completely smashed, especially this one here. And I think this is where one of James Cameron's submersibles, one of the ROVs, actually got into Titanic. They were a little bit nervous though, because there was obviously glass at the base of the window frame there. They were a bit worried that it would cut the tether, but they squeezed through just. So just flying along here, we can see where B-decks kind of coming down on this side of the ship. Unfortunately, yeah, the port side A-deck promenade is completely blocked off here as well. Unfortunately, they had some great photographs from the promenade back in the 2000s where they shone light through. I don't know we're going to be able to do those again ever again, because this is all blocked off at this end. At the other end, the boat deck's coming down, so I don't know that we'll be able to recreate those photos. This hole that's opened up looks into the one of the crew galleys. Yeah, something's come down on top of it. I don't know what it is. It's a bit of a shame. Yeah, there was a crew galley in there where they would have cooked their food, which is why there is a skylight to get, you know, some fresh air and light in. And two of those skylight cover windows have been blown off. The number one cargo hatch's cover famously blew off, so that's actually a long ways out forward of the wreck. Go down over the side here and have a look. This is pretty interesting. This is a big piece of, looks like shell plating, side of the ship that's been torn apart. You know, as Titanic's bow section hit the sea floor, a lot of debris and stuff that had broken off during the breakup slowly flooded down and rained on top of it. So it was raining pieces of machinery, you know, pieces of debris and even bodies. And it would have been a pretty grim sight, but it means that there's weird placement of things, like a heater is resting somewhere on the wreck where it shouldn't be, and, you know, a teacup resting on a boiler and that kind of thing. So all these light pieces of debris just rain down on top, putting them in weird places. But you can see along here that pieces of railing are coming off. They're sort of breaking off from the decks above, coming down into the silt below. Let's fly along the side of the ship and go and check out the breakup zone, because this is something I've been really keen to check out. This is a part of the ship that hasn't been documented in a lot of detail. You can see here that the bottom of the ship, the bilge, has been blown outwards, which has hit the seafloor with such immense force that the bowels of the ship, the sides, have just been blasted out. We can see some shell plate damage here. That's quite significant. And you can just see, just holding on, this porthole, everything around it has been ripped off. So that porthole would have once been probably up there by the looks of it. But the brass frame is probably, there's like a couple of rivets still in place holding it intact. But that will, you know, probably in the next few years rust through and drop down. Either it'll fall inside the Titanic or it'll drop out and land right there. So watch this space. Gee, you really get a sense for the scale of this thing. I mean, down here, we're along the hull, and towering above us is this ship. That is such a ghostly image. Man. This is just about the view that boat number 2 would have had after they came down alongside of the ship before they rowed away. And it's pretty eerie. Gee, that's a hole I'd never seen before. That's interesting. Yeah, this is where the shell plating's been torn out. It seems to rip in weird and unpredictable spots. Yeah, we can see some of these windows have been smashed. That Utley pivoting window, that's had its glass broken out of it. So obviously the hull was subjected to some pretty extreme force when it came down. Come down here. Yeah, some of this stuff is a little bit difficult to make out. We've got what might be a big pipe there, I don't know. Yeah. We'll come along to the breakup zone and have a look. So, there's B deck coming down. Actually, you know what? Let's do another before and after shot. Why not? That's one of the D deck gangway doors that has broken off. There's another one right there. But that one has actually broken off its hinges and it has been recovered and it is now on display. Above it was the B deck entrance for first class, and this is one of the doors right here. That door is gone. The one next to it is locked shut. But there is a very famous photograph taken of Titanic by Father Francis Brown as he boarded the ship, and it was taken from this exact angle. And I'll see if I can do a before and after for you. Here we go. It looks like he boarded through one of these two doors, and he looked down the side of the ship and he took this photograph. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of Titanic missing. Magellan plans to add the stern section later on, which is really cool. It would be good to see more of the stern, especially because it's very, very difficult to make out from photographs because it was just subjected to so much damage. But if we go back here, we should see some pretty interesting stuff. It's amazing the scale of this. I mean, this huge piece of shell plating that's just come off in one giant chunk. Unreal. The scale of this, the size of it is unreal. That's what really gets me about this whole experience. You really get a sense for how big this is, you know, how big Titanic was, how big the wreck is. People ask why it can't be raised, why it can't be brought to the surface. And the challenges involved in bringing something like this up to the surface again. Like, look at this. Amazing. Well, let's check out the breakup zone. Oh, this is the limit of our excursion, but I think maybe we'll be able to just get a little sneaky look. What do you say? Cool. Okay, so we can check out the breakup zone. When Titanic broke apart, whole chunks of the center of the ship essentially ripped off and disappeared, and were crushed up against each other in the debris field. The bow section, fortunately, as we know, is fairly intact. It gives us a pretty interesting look at a cross section of the ship. It's almost like you've cut a loaf of bread, like a baguette or something. And this is one of the boiler rooms. So you can actually see the double-ended boilers here with their furnace doors. 3 furnace doors on each, extending across the side of the ship. You can actually see the main steam lines here, which ran through the boiler rooms and connected essentially directly into the engines, all the way further aft behind us. Obviously, there's nothing out there now, but that's where they would have gone to. And then all the decks above have pancaked down on top. Which is a bit of a shame because there were some really nice rooms in here. We've got the dining saloon, so the first class dining saloon would have been about, that's G deck, yeah, about here. Maybe about here. That could be D deck there. That would have been the dining saloon. And then above it, the first class lounge, the reading and writing room, they've all been essentially squashed. And what we're seeing here is the roof of the boat deck, the raised roof above the first class lounge, and right here would have sat the compass platform that sat in between funnels number 2 and 3. So this is almost essentially like the dead center of the ship. And it's kind of ironic. That's exactly where things are ripped apart. It's pretty sad to see it in this state, really. We can already see it being eaten through. You can actually see the outlines of the edges. Whenever there's teak margin planking like that, we know that's the edge of the roof. And this would have been the roof for the lounge that's being eaten through. And it would have once sat all the way up here. But it's all collapsed. Unreal. The recognizable features like fans are still intact. I mean, this is one of the ventilating fans. I mean, you can see the little housing for the motor there, the electric motor. That's still intact. And this is the roof of the reading and writing room, which was one of the finest rooms on the ship. And yeah, doesn't look like there's much in there that you can write home about now. Unreal. Yeah, this is a disaster zone, hey, gee. There were no boats stored in this part of the ship. This was all a bulwark to protect first-class passengers from going overboard, so there would be no davits or anything attached here. It was just like promenade space. It's interesting as well that the deck house for the second funnel would have been about here, and this is one of the big ventilators behind it. And then it rises up like a tower. The deck house itself rises up from way, way, way down below. It just gives you a sense of how they built these ships, where the funnels essentially were like sitting on big islands that ran all the way down into the bowels of the ship. It's thought that this is one of the places here, just forward of it, where the first-class band performed during the sinking of the ship. It's a natural little alcove. You had the raised roof here for the reading and writing room, and the entrance for the first-class grand staircase here. And it was a nice little protected area where they were kind of tucked out of the way, away from the goings-on that were happening around them. You just had 2 fans, one here and one here. And yeah, in theory, it's thought that they would have sat there and played for at least part of the sinking, and then maybe relocated later on. It's kind of nice that area is still relatively intact. If this is only 10% of the final scans, then that's pretty exciting, because just imagine what kind of detail we could get out of 100%. You know, it's remarkable. I know Magellan have really put a lot of effort into this. It's a great way of getting us a look at what Titanic looks like, making a little bit of fun out of it. As you can see, there are objectives, which I've stringently ignored to this point. But I just wanted to have a look at the ship, because it is super exciting to get to see this. You can actually see the base of one of the davits is still intact right here, and just resting next to it is the cover, is the roof for the entryway into the first-class grand staircase. There were like these little, sort of, at one end they were semicircular in profile, little curved roof covers to protect passengers from the elements as they were stepping in or out of the first-class grand staircase. And that one's come to rest against the base of this davit here. So that's pretty recognizable. But everything else back here where the gymnasium is, the grand staircase is, not very recognizable. Not very recognizable, I'll be honest. There's really not a lot here that tells us anything. I mentioned earlier that we can't get through into the A-deck promenade, but it looks like there is a hole big enough here for a submersible and a small ROV to get through. So hopefully, I'm not gonna squeeze through. But hopefully it means that in future expeditions, we still might be able to explore the A-deck promenade there, because it's collapsing and it looks like we can still just squeeze through. I want to see if we can still make out some of the plaques that were placed at the forward end of the boat deck. There's a really famous Frank Brown photograph, which we'll recreate now, of just after Titanic almost collided with the SS City of New York when she was leaving Southampton. And you can just make out one of the plaques that said passengers weren't allowed forward of the breakwater onto the bow. We'll see if that's still there. Just a quick pause to point out that this used to be the chart room in Captain Smith's quarters, and famously you could make out his bathtub, which would have been sitting around here. But you can't see it anymore, because yeah, this entire section of the ship's been broken up and is collapsing. And what's really weird about this is that obviously this is where the number 1 funnel came down. Like number 2 funnel we were looking at earlier, you can see the lower funnel, the interior of that, some of the pipes and lines that led up. You can actually see a ladder on the inside, which is kind of cool. Looks like a ladder. The fiddly grates, it's all quite similar to number 2 funnel, but there was a water tank behind it. And what's really weird is that the water tank is in like pretty good condition, even though it's made ostensibly out of fairly thin steel. So Titanic, the wreck, is a story of contrasts, because although horrible damage has been wrought to certain parts of the ship, in other areas like this, there are pieces of machinery that are still intact and look just about as good as the day that they were installed on the ship. And just feet away, you've got this absolute mess of broken steel and timber and shredded stuff. But elsewhere, things are looking pretty good. Amazing. So let's go and recreate that Father Brown photograph. I think that there is a big chunk of funnel, which is still holding on. Wow. Yeah, the number 1 funnel is the first that came down, and it's thought to have taken a few people with it, which is pretty terrifying. These were very big and very scary. The idea of that thing coming down on top of you is nightmare fuel. So that it's poignant to see that part of the wreck. This is also a part of the wreck that's been talked about quite a lot. I've talked about it before, but it's the davit that First Officer William Murdoch was working with right at the end when the ship was sinking. I mentioned earlier that the davits are, most of them are, sitting cranked out where they lowered their boats, but Murdoch was doing his best to try and load one of the boats right at the end, and he cranked it in, and then the ship essentially sank out from underneath him and his crew. So it meant that the davit has been left behind, pointing skyward. Just forward of it, we can see the reverse aspect, the rearward aspect of one of the bridge wing cabs. And we know it's one of the bridge wing cabs because it's got this nice big square window with one of the mechanisms that was designed essentially to lower the window. You could have placed a little handle in and cranked that window down so you could get your head out and have a look down the length of the ship. And you can just see the bottom of it, that kind of tube there. That's still intact. Interesting. So we'll take a look at that Frank Brown picture. He was standing forward on B deck. It's just down here. I'm going to try and make sure I don't smash my submersible into anything. I think he was standing about here when he took his picture. So we'll put the submersible out there and have a look. There you go, before and after. The tugs have come alongside to try and pull Titanic away from the Oceanic just in front of it and the SS City of New York. But you can really get a sense of just how much has been broken here and actually just how much is still intact. It's pretty remarkable. But one of the plaques I was telling you about is right there in the photograph. So I'm going to see if we can go find it by swimming ahead. It should be about here. There should be another one on the other side. Let's go see if they're still there. I can play with this all day. So it should be somewhere here. Is that it? Is that it right there? It is between two of these stanchions and it is kind of rectangular shaped. I mean, it's the right shape. I think that's it right there. Let's see if there's another one on the other side, because there should have been 2 of them. So it should be about here, eh? There's another one there. I think that's the plaque. Cool. Yeah, I think that's the plaque that would have said passengers not allowed forward of this. Wow. Looks like it's been eaten through, or it might have actually rust on top of it. I don't think it's been eaten through. I think just the steel is rusting on top of it. It looks like it's been eaten through, but it hasn't. Wow. Didn't know. I had no idea those were still there. I guess it makes sense. I just thought maybe they'd been recovered, or... Yeah, you can still see it. Right there. Cool. That's pretty cool. I'm going to recreate one last photo. It is one of my favorites from the Titanic. It is one of the photographs of 2 of her crew, 2 of her more senior crew, the Chief Purser and Captain Smith. And they were standing on the officers' quarters. And the reason I want to show you this photo as the last one is to give you a real sense of like that real before and after type thing, because Titanic's been pretty badly damaged in this area, and this is one of the more probably impactful before and afters. So if we just swing up here, just forward of the expansion joint, we're going to find a door, that door, and we're going to settle down just in front of it. Because if we swing about right here, we'll be able to recreate that angle perfectly. We'll get a little bit closer. There we go. So stood right there would have been Captain Smith and McElroy. And you can see just how much damage has been done during the sinking and with the ravages of time. Titanic should never have been there in the first place. She shouldn't be at the bottom of the seafloor, bottom of the ocean. Yeah, here she is. Amazing. Yeah, I feel a little wistful seeing this stuff. It's just remarkable. Wow. Look, you can get your hands on the ROV experience by Magellan. It is available on Steam. It's about 24, 25 Australian dollars. And it's a pretty remarkable experience. I think I've been talking, how long now? How long did I just spend doing that? An hour and 16 minutes, and yet I feel like I've only just scratched the surface. I know they've got a whole plan for the future. They want to include the stern section. They want to try and get some more high resolution scans in. Give it a look. It's really well worth it. I want to congratulate Magellan for doing such a spectacular job and giving us the opportunity to go and explore Titanic as if we were down there with it in an ROV, because it's a pretty spectacular experience, I do have to say. So thank you so much for joining me. We might do another one of these again. Maybe we can do it as a live stream. If there is something you'd like me to check out, go ahead and pop it in the comments. Maybe we can have a look on a live stream next time. But thank you so much for joining me down here on the wreck of Titanic. As always, stay safe, stay happy. I'll see you again next time.